You know what's crazy about New York? One minute you're on top of the world, and the next you're fighting just to survive on the streets. And if you're enjoying this story so far, hit that like button because trust me, you'll want to follow along for this wild ride. But sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a way of bringing people back together when they need each other most. This is one of those stories. It all started with a press conference that had the entire city talking. Alexander Stone, the self-made billionaire who basically owned half of Manhattan's skyline, stood behind a podium at Stone Financial headquarters in Times Square. The cameras were rolling, reporters were shouting questions, and Alex looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Mr. Stone, the $2 billion reward you announced," a reporter called out. "What's your connection to this mysterious woman you're searching for?" Alex's jaw tightened. He gripped the podium like it was the only thing keeping him standing. 10 months ago, someone tried to kill me. This woman saved my life. She disappeared before I could properly thank her. He held up a small, delicate brooch shaped like a peace lily, its silver petals catching the camera lights. She left this behind. It's not just any piece of jewelry. It's custom designed, one of a kind. When I find her, she'll become my wife. And I'll make sure she never wants for anything again. The crowd erupted with more questions, but Alex was already walking away, his security team clearing a path. What the cameras didn't catch was the way his hands shook slightly, or how he whispered to his assistant, "She saved my life in more ways than one, Marcus. Find her." But across town in the Upper East Side, in a penthouse that screamed old money and new attitude, Sophia Martinez was having the worst day of her life. And that was saying something, considering the year she'd been having. Victoria Harrington Martinez stood in the marble foyer of the family penthouse, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against a stack of medical bills. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it could cut glass, and her smile was the kind that made smart people run for cover. "Sophia, darling." Victoria's voice dripped with fake sweetness. "We need to talk." Sophia looked up from her laptop where she'd been working on a design project. At 24, she had her mother's dark eyes and determination, but right now, both were filled with exhaustion. Her freelance graphic design business was just starting to take off, and she'd been pulling all-nighters to meet deadlines. "If this is about the rent again, Victoria, I told you I'd have it by Friday." "Oh, it's not about rent, sweetheart." Victoria's smile grew wider, more predatory. "It's about this." She threw the medical bills across the coffee table. Sophia's stomach dropped as she saw the letterhead from Manhattan Women's Health. The pregnancy test results, the prenatal vitamin prescriptions, everything she'd been trying to keep private. "How did you get those?" Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. "Does it matter? What matters is that my stepdaughter is pregnant and she's been lying about it for months." Victoria's voice rose with every word. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our family's reputation, to Richard's career?" That's when Richard Martinez walked in, looking like a man who'd already lost the argument before it started. At 52, Sophia's adoptive father had the kind of weak chin that suggested he'd been letting other people make decisions for him his whole life. And Victoria had been making those decisions for the past 10 years. "Dad," Sophia stood up, reaching for him, "please let me explain." But Richard wouldn't even look at her. "Sophia, I'm disappointed. After everything we've done for you, after we took you in when your mother died, this is how you repay us." "That's rich coming from you," Sophia shot back, her mother's fire finally showing through. "Mom built Lynn Graphics from nothing. This penthouse, your pharmaceutical company, everything you have is because of her work. And you let this woman," she pointed at Victoria, "sell it all off piece by piece." Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. "Your mother was a struggling artist when she met your father. He saved her from a life of poverty. And this is how her daughter repays him? Getting pregnant by some random man and trying to trap him into marriage?" "It wasn't random," Sophia said quietly. It was one night at a charity gala. I was working as the event designer. There was this man. He was in trouble, and I helped him. Something happened between us. Something real. And he promised he'd find me. Oh, please. Isabella, Victoria's 22-year-old daughter, waltzed in wearing designer clothes that cost more than most people's rent. With her bleached blonde hair and Instagram-perfect makeup, she looked like a carbon copy of her mother, just with fewer wrinkles and more followers. You're seriously going to stand there and tell us some Prince Charming story? What's next, glass slippers? The man on TV, Sophia said suddenly, her eyes wide. The billionaire offering the reward. That's him. That's the father of my baby. The room went dead silent. Then Victoria started laughing, a sound that could freeze hell over. Alexander Stone? The Alexander Stone? Sophia, sweetheart, I know pregnancy can cause delusions, but this is really something special. Victoria wiped fake tears from her eyes. You're telling us that one of the richest men in America is the father of your bastard child? It's not a bastard, Sophia said fiercely. And yes, it's him. I helped him that night. Someone had drugged him, tried to kill him. I got him to safety, and we connected. He had this peace lily brooch in his jacket, something about it being from his grandmother. I left it with him as a promise that I'd find him again. Richard finally spoke up, his voice hollow. Even if that were true, which it's not, you've brought shame on this family. An unwed pregnancy, secret affairs with men you barely know. Your mother would be disgusted. Those words hit Sophia like a physical blow. Don't you dare talk about my mother. She would have supported me. She would have helped me figure this out instead of throwing me away like garbage. Well, your mother isn't here, Victoria said with satisfaction. And I've had enough of this fantasy. Richard, tell her. Richard looked at his shoes. Sophia, I want you out of this house by tonight. You're no longer welcome here. You're no longer part of this family. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sophia grabbed the back of the chair to steady herself. Dad, you can't be serious. I'm pregnant. It's winter. Where am I supposed to go? That's not our problem anymore, Isabella chimed in. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to play house with some stranger. You did this, Sophia turned to Victoria, everything suddenly making sense. You were at that charity gala. You've been planning this. You drugged him, didn't you? You set us up. Victoria's smile was all the confirmation Sophia needed. Prove it, darling. But even if you could, which you can't, it doesn't matter now. You signed away your rights to your mother's company when you turned 18. Remember? You were so eager to be independent, to make your own way. Well, congratulations. You're about to get exactly what you wanted. The legal papers appeared as if by magic, pulled from Victoria's purse with a flourish. Sophia's own signature stared back at her from a document she'd signed years ago, thinking she was just updating some paperwork. Her father's name was on. There, too, right next to Victoria's. You forged these, Sophia whispered. Again, prove it. But while you're trying to figure that out, you need to pack. The locks change at midnight. 2 hours later, Sophia stood on the sidewalk outside what used to be her home, holding a single suitcase and trying not to cry. The December wind cut through her coat like it had a personal grudge, and the snow that had seemed so pretty from inside the penthouse felt like tiny needles against her face. She'd tried calling the few friends she had, but Victoria had been thorough. Word had already spread through their social circle about Sophia's disgrace. Doors that had been opened to the Martinez name were suddenly mysteriously closed. By the time she made it to Central Park, her feet were numb and her breath was coming out in white puffs that seemed to mock her with their visibility. She found a bench near the pond, the same pond where she used to feed ducks with her mother. When she was little, back when the world made sense, that's when she saw her. An older woman, maybe 60, with silver hair peeking out from under a worn knit cap. She was setting up what looked like a small camp behind some bushes, laying out blankets and organizing a collection of plastic bags. "You look like you could use some help, dear," the woman said, noticing Sophia watching her. "I'm fine," Sophia lied, her teeth chattering. "Sure you are, and I'm the Queen of England." The woman's voice had a warm rasp to it, like she'd seen too much, but hadn't let it make her cruel. "I'm Margaret, and before you ask, yes, I live here. Have been for about 3 years now. What's your story?" Something about Margaret's matter-of-fact. Kindness broke down Sophia's walls. Before she knew it, she was telling this stranger everything. About the baby. About Victoria's betrayal. About the man who'd promised to find her, but clearly hadn't tried very hard. "Honey," Margaret said when Sophia finished, "you're talking about Alexander Stone like he's some fairy tale prince, but rich men are just men. They make promises when it's convenient and forget them when it's not." "But the reward," Sophia protested weakly. $2 billion. For a woman who saved his life. You said yourself someone was trying to kill him. That reward isn't about love, sweetheart. It's about debt. Business." Margaret pulled out a thermos and poured hot coffee into a paper cup. "Here, you need this more than I do." The coffee was terrible and perfect. As Sophia sipped it, Margaret continued setting up her camp with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. "Tell you what," Margaret said. "You can stay with me tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out your next move. But first things first, you need to eat something. When's the last time you had a real meal?" Sophia couldn't remember. The pregnancy had been making her nauseous anyway, and the stress of hiding it had killed her appetite completely. But Margaret was already pulling out packages of crackers and a jar of peanut butter. "It's not the 4 seasons," Margaret said, "but it's protein. Good for the baby." They spent that first night huddled together under Margaret's collection of blankets, sharing stories. Margaret had been a social worker before the system wore her down. She'd lost her apartment when the building went co-op, and she couldn't afford the conversion. But she'd found a community here among the others that society had forgotten. "You'd be surprised," Margaret told her, "how many smart, capable people end up here. It's not always drugs or mental illness, though sometimes it's that too. Sometimes it's just bad luck and a society that's forgotten how to catch people when they fall." Over the next few weeks, Sophia learned to navigate her new reality. Margaret introduced her to the community center in Brooklyn, where she could shower and charge her phone. She found a part-time job helping immigrant kids with their homework, using her design skills to make their school projects more engaging. Though kids loved her. Little Maria, whose family had come from Colombia, reminded Sophia of herself at that age. Curious, artistic, full of dreams that seemed too big for the world she'd been given. When Maria drew a picture of the Manhattan skyline, pointing excitedly at the Stone Financial Building, Sophia felt something twist in her chest. "My mama cleans offices there," Maria said proudly. "She says the man who owns it is very important." Sophia looked at the drawing more closely. Maria had captured something in the building's lines, something that made it look both powerful and lonely. It reminded her of that night 10 months ago when she'd found Alexander Stone collapsed in a hallway of the Plaza Hotel. She'd been there working late, setting up decorations for a charity gala the next night. The peace lily arrangements were her signature touch, delicate flowers that symbolized rebirth and hope. She'd been carrying a tray of them when she heard the commotion. The memories came back in fragments. Alexander, disoriented and struggling, against 2 men in suits who were clearly not trying to help him. The way he'd looked at her when she stepped between them, like she was his lifeline. How she'd gotten him to her car and driven him to the hospital, staying with him until the drugs worked their way out of his system, and then later, in her apartment, when he was clear-headed enough to thank her properly. The way he'd looked at her peace lily brooch, the one she'd inherited from her mother, and told her about his own grandmother's love for those flowers. How they'd talked until dawn about art and business and dreams that seemed too big for the world they'd been given. He'd promised to find her, had taken her brooch as a reminder, pressed it into his palm like a talisman. But then reality had intruded. His security team had tracked him down, and in the chaos of explanations and damage control, Sophia had slipped away. She'd figured he'd call or send someone to find her. She'd been naive enough to think that one perfect night could overcome the difference in their worlds. But now, 5 months pregnant and living in a Brooklyn community center, Sophia was starting to understand what Margaret had meant about rich men and their promises. The pregnancy progressed, and Sophia tried to build a life in the spaces between worlds. She was too proud to go back to Victoria, even if that had been an option, which it wasn't, and she was too realistic to keep hoping that Alexander would somehow track her down in a city of 8 million people. When her water broke during a late March snowstorm, Margaret was the one who got her to the hospital. Brooklyn Methodist wasn't the private suite at Lenox Hill that her old life would have afforded, but the nurses were kind, and the doctor seemed competent. "It's twins," Dr. Rodriguez told her as she pushed. "Didn't you know?" Sophia was too focused on breathing through the pain to answer. Twins. Of course it was twins, because single motherhood wasn't challenging enough, but when she heard the first cry, then the second, everything else fell away. Her babies, Alexander's babies, though he'd never know it. 2 perfect little lives that were hers to protect and love and raise. "Let me see them," she gasped. There was a pause. Dr. Rodriguez and the nurses exchanged a look that made Sophia's blood run cold. "I'm sorry," Dr. Rodriguez said gently. "They didn't make it. The cord was wrapped around both of them. There was nothing we could do. The world stopped. Actually stopped, like someone had hit pause on reality itself." Sophia tried to sit up, tried to demand to see her babies, but the drugs they were giving her made everything fuzzy and distant. "No," she whispered. "No, I heard them crying. They were crying." "Sometimes the mind hears what it needs to hear," a nurse said softly. "I'm so sorry for your loss." But even through the medication fog, Sophia knew something was wrong. She'd heard her babies cry. She'd felt them move just minutes before. And the look the staff had exchanged, that wasn't grief. That was guilt. When she woke up hours later, Margaret was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. "They told me," Margaret said quietly. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." "Where are they?" Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. "I want to see them." "The hospital has procedures for these things. They're taking care of everything." But Sophia noticed that Margaret wouldn't meet her eyes. And when she asked about burial arrangements, about death certificates, about any of the details that should have been automatic, everyone suddenly had somewhere else to be. It was Margaret, who finally told her the truth 3 days later when they were back in the park. "There's something you need to know," Margaret said. "About the hospital, about what really happened." Sophia had been staring at the pond, watching the ducks and remembering feeding them with her mother. She turned to look at Margaret, and the older woman's face was grim. "I know people who work there. Cleaning staff mostly. They see things, hear things that the fancy folks think they don't notice." Margaret took a deep breath. "Your babies didn't die, Sophia. They were taken." The words didn't make sense at first. "Taken? What do you mean taken?" "There's a network. Rich families who want babies but don't want to wait for legal adoption. They pay the right doctors, the right administrators. Your babies were sold, sweetheart, to someone who could afford to buy them." Sophia felt like she was falling, even though she was sitting still. "That's not possible. You can't just buy babies. This is America, not some third world country. Money makes anything possible. And you had no family fighting for you, no lawyers demanding answers. You were just a homeless girl who couldn't prove who the father was." Margaret's voice was gentle, but firm. "I'm sorry." I tried to find out more, but the trail goes cold pretty fast. These people are professional. For weeks afterward, Sophia existed in a fog of grief and rage. She tried to investigate, tried to find some trace of her children, but Margaret was right. The trail was ice cold. The hospital records were sealed, the staff had signed NDAs, and her babies had disappeared into a world she couldn't access. But grief, Sophia learned, has a way of crystallizing into something harder, something sharper. If she couldn't get her children back, she could at least make sure the people responsible paid. And that started with Victoria. It took her 5 years to put all the pieces together. 5 years of working multiple jobs, of learning the legal system, of building connections in places Victoria would never think to look. Sophia reinvented herself, trading her romantic artist dreams for the harder skills of investigation and manipulation. She got her GED, then a business degree from a community college. She learned accounting and corporate law. She studied the pharmaceutical industry until she could speak their language fluently. And slowly, carefully, she began to uncover the truth about Victoria's charity work. It turned out that Victoria's reputation as a philanthropist was built on fraud. Her charity, Harrington Foundation for Children's Welfare, was laundering money through fake adoption agencies. The same network that had stolen Sophia's babies was being used to traffic children, from poor families to rich ones, with Victoria taking a cut of every transaction. But the investigation also revealed something else, something that made Sophia's hands shake when she read the files. Her children hadn't just been sold to random rich people. They'd been given to Alexander Stone, the man who'd promised to find. Her had been raising her children for 5 years, never knowing they were his. By the time Sophia learned this, she was 29 and running her own design firm out of a small office in Soho. She'd built a life for herself, had even started dating again, though nothing serious. But the knowledge that her children were alive, that they were so close she could probably see their school from her apartment window, changed everything. She started planning. Not just revenge, though that was certainly part of it, but a way to get back into the world she'd been exiled from, to get close enough to Alexander to learn about her children without revealing who she was. At least not right away. The opportunity came when her design firm was hired to create marketing materials for a new development in Manhattan. The client was Stone Financial Group. Sophia spent 3 months on that project, creating visual presentations and brand guidelines that would put her in the same room as Alexander Stone. She researched everything about him, learned that he'd never married, that he was raising 2 children as a single father, that he'd built his empire from nothing after his own family had cut him off. The twins would be starting kindergarten that fall, Ethan and Emma Stone, according to the society pages. They were beautiful children, with dark hair like hers and eyes like their father's. In the few photos she could find, they looked happy and loved and completely unaware that their entire existence was built on a lie. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in October. Sophia dressed carefully, in a black suit that was professional but flattering, her hair pulled back in a style that emphasized her cheekbones. She wanted to look successful, untouchable. She wanted to look like someone who belonged in Alexander Stone's world. But when she walked into the conference room at Stone Financial and saw him for the first time in 5 years, all her careful preparation crumbled. He was older, of course. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a hardness to his jaw that spoke of difficult decisions and heavy responsibilities. But he was still the man who'd held her hand in the hospital, who'd promised to build her a garden full of peace lilies. "Ms. Martinez," he said, standing to shake her hand. "I've been looking forward to this presentation. Your preliminary work has been impressive." His touch was brief, professional. No recognition flickered in his eyes. She was just another contractor, another face in the endless parade of people who wanted something from him. But for Sophia, the contact was electric. This was the father of her children, the man she'd never stopped loving despite everything. and he had no idea who she was. "Thank you, Mr. Stone," she managed. "I think you'll be pleased with what we've developed." The presentation went well. Sophia had always been good at her job, but she outdid herself that day, creating a vision for the development that was both practical and inspired. She watched Alexander's face as she spoke, saw the moment when professional interest shifted to genuine appreciation. "This is exactly what we were looking for," he said when she finished. "You've captured something here that our other contractors missed. The human element." "Good design isn't just about aesthetics," Sophia replied. "It's about understanding what people need, what makes them feel safe and welcomed. Family is everything, and any space we create should honor that." Something flickered in his expression then, a shadow of pain or memory. "Family," he repeated, quietly. "Yes, I suppose it is." After the meeting, as Sophia packed up her materials, Alexander lingered in the conference room. "Ms. Martinez," he said, "this might be presumptuous, but would you be interested in having dinner? To discuss the project further, of course." Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was her chance, her way back into his world. But it was also dangerous territory. The closer she got to him, the more likely it became that he'd recognize her. And she wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Not until she knew more about her children, about what kind of father he'd been to them. "I'd like that," she said. "But maybe we could make it coffee instead. I have an early morning tomorrow." They met at a small cafe in Soho, the kind of place where the baristas were aspiring artists and the walls were covered with local work. Sophia had chosen it deliberately, on her turf, somewhere she felt in control. But Alexander seemed comfortable anywhere. He ordered black coffee and a blueberry. Muffin sat back in his chair like he had all the time in the world. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "Your portfolio shows a lot of range. How long have you been in business?" Sophia had rehearsed this conversation, but actually having it was different. She told him about her firm, about her focus on community-centered design, about her belief that good architecture could heal old wounds. All true, but carefully edited. "What about family?" he asked. "Kids?" The question hit like a physical blow. Sophia took a sip of her latte to buy time. "No kids. I was pregnant once, but it didn't work out." "I'm sorry," Alexander said, and she could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. "That must have been difficult." "It was, but it taught me that family isn't always about biology. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to love you." He nodded slowly. "I have 2 children, twins. They're 5 now. Best thing that ever happened to me." "Their mother?" Sophia tried to keep her voice casual. "Not in the picture. It's complicated." Alexander's expression closed off slightly. "But they're good kids, smart, funny, kind. Everything I could have hoped for." They talked for another hour about art and business and the challenge of balancing ambition with meaning. Alexander was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her opinions, quick to laugh at her jokes. It would have been easy to forget who he was, to pretend this was just a normal coffee date with an attractive man. But then his phone buzzed and she saw the lock screen photo. 2 beautiful children, arms wrapped around each other, grinning at the camera. Her children. "I should go," Alexander said, checking the time. "School pickup." "Of course," Sophia managed. A smile. "Thank you for coffee. I enjoyed getting to know you better." "Same here. I'll have my team send over the contract details next week. I hope this is the beginning of a long partnership." As he stood to leave, Sophia made a decision that would change everything. "Alexander," she said, "would you like to bring the kids to my gallery opening next month? It's a community event, very family-friendly. I think they might enjoy it." He paused, surprised. "You have a gallery?" "Part-time. I showcase work by local artists, particularly immigrants and refugees." Art that tells stories about finding home in a new place. That sounds meaningful. Yes, I think Ethan and Emma would like that. Thank you for inviting us. After he left, Sophia sat in the cafe for another hour, staring at her reflection in the window. She was playing a dangerous game, getting close to Alexander while hiding her identity. But she needed to see her children, needed to know what kind of life they were living. The gallery opening was held on a rainy November evening in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. Sophia had transformed the space into something magical, with soft lighting and comfortable seating areas where families could relax while viewing the art. The pieces on display told stories of journey and loss and hope, themes that felt painfully relevant to her own life. Alexander arrived with the twins just as the event was getting started. Sophia watched from across the room as they entered. 5-year-old Ethan holding his father's hand while Emma skipped ahead, her eyes wide with excitement. They were beautiful, not just physically, though they were certainly that, but in the way. They moved through the world, confident but not entitled, curious but polite. They looked at the art with genuine interest, asking Alexander questions that showed they'd been taught to think critically about what they saw. "Daddy, why is the lady in this painting crying?" Emma asked, pointing to a piece by a Syrian refugee artist. "What do you think?" Alexander asked in return, crouching down to her level. "Maybe she's sad because she misses her old home. But maybe she's also happy because she found a new one." "That's very thoughtful, Em. Art often shows us that people can feel two different things at the same time." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. This was how she would have wanted to raise them, encouraging their curiosity, teaching them empathy. Alexander was a good father, better than she'd dared to hope. "Excuse me," a small voice said beside her. Sophia looked down to find Ethan tugging on her dress. "Are you the artist?" "I'm one of them," Sophia said, kneeling down to his level. "What do you think of the art?" "It's really good, but I like your necklace better." He pointed to the piece lily, pendant she wore, a replacement for the one she'd left with Alexander 5 years ago. "My dad has one just like it." Sophia's breath caught. "He does?" "Yeah, but his is a pin. He keeps it in his desk drawer, and sometimes he takes it out and looks at it. He says it reminds him of someone important." "Ethan, there you are." Alexander appeared beside them, his eyes taking in Sophia's expression with concern. "I'm sorry. He tends to wander off when something catches his interest." "It's fine," Sophia managed. "He was just admiring my necklace." Alexander's gaze dropped to the pendant at her throat, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. She watched recognition flicker across his features, saw the exact moment when the pieces clicked into place. "Sophia," he whispered. "Hello, Alexander." Emma tugged on her father's jacket. "Daddy, do you know the art lady?" "Yes," Alexander said slowly, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "We're old friends." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Alexander stayed until closing, the twins eventually falling asleep on one of the gallery couches, while the adults talked in hushed tones. Sophia found herself telling him everything. About Victoria's betrayal, about the hospital, about the 5 years she'd spent believing her children were dead. The Stone Martinez Foundation opened a year later, combining Alexander's business acumen with Sophia's artistic vision to support immigrant families and fight child trafficking. Their offices were in the same Soho building where Sophia had started. Her design firm expanded now to accommodate their growing staff. Ethan and Emma, now 6 and in 1st grade, spent their afternoons at the foundation, doing homework while surrounded by the constant bustle of people working to make the world better. They understood that their family had a unique story, that they'd been separated and brought back together by forces both cruel and kind. "Mommy," Emma asked one day while Sophia helped her with an art project, "why were there bad people who didn't want us to be together?" "Sometimes people do bad things because they think they can get away with it," Sophia explained. But there are always more good people than bad people. And when good people work together, they can fix almost anything. Even broken families, especially broken families. As evening fell over Manhattan, Sophia looked around at her life. Her husband working at his laptop while humming under his breath. Her children arguing over who got to feed the goldfish they'd adopted from the foundation's lobby. Margaret setting the table and muttering about how rich people never ate enough. Vegetables. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she was 24 and newly pregnant, scared and alone. It was better. Messier. More complicated, but infinitely richer. Built on a foundation of truth and trust, and the understanding that love sometimes means fighting for each other through the darkest times. Outside, the city sparkled with millions of lights, each one representing a story, a family, a dream being pursued against the odds. Somewhere out there, other young mothers were facing impossible choices. Other children were being separated from the people who loved them. Other families were being torn apart by greed and corruption. But somewhere else, investigators were building. Cases, lawyers were fighting for justice, and ordinary people were choosing to help instead of look away. The work would never be finished, but it would continue. "Dinner's ready," Margaret called from the kitchen. "Coming," Sophia called back, gathering up Emma's art supplies while Alexander shut his laptop and Ethan reluctantly stopped playing with his toy cars. As they sat around the table, their found family, their chosen family, their real family in every way that mattered, Sophia felt the peace that had eluded her for so long finally settle in her chest. Not the fragile peace of someone who'd never been tested, but the deeper peace of someone who'd been broken and rebuilt themselves stronger. "What are we grateful for today?" Alexander asked, continuing a tradition they'd started soon after the wedding. "Art class," Emma said immediately. "Mrs. Peterson said my painting of our family was the best one." "Soccer practice," Ethan added. "And that Mom packed the good cookies in my lunch." "Both of you eating your vegetables without complaining," Margaret said with a grin. "Miracles do happen." "My family," Alexander said simply, reaching for Sophia's hand. "All of it, the messy parts and the perfect parts and everything in between. Second chances," Sophia said, "and the people who help you take them." Later that night, after the children were asleep and Margaret had retired to her room, Sophia and Alexander stood on their balcony overlooking the city. The same city where they'd first met, where they'd lost each other, where they'd found their way back. "Do you think we would have made it?" Sophia asked. "If none of the bad stuff had happened? If we'd just been two people who met at a party and started dating normally?" "I don't know," Alexander said honestly. "Maybe. But I think we needed to become the people we are now to build what we have now. You needed to learn how strong you are, and I needed to learn what really matters." "And what really matters?" "This," he said, gesturing toward the apartment behind them where their children slept safe and sound. "Family. Justice. Using whatever power we have to protect the people who can't protect themselves." Very philosophical for a Wall Street tycoon. Very practical for someone who almost lost everything that mattered because he was too focused on money and power to see what was right in front of him. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the lights of the city twinkle below them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, foundation business to handle, children to raise, a world that still had too much injustice and not enough people willing to fight it. But tonight, they were together, and that was enough. "I love you," Sophia said. "I love you too, all of you, forever." And in the morning, when Emma crawled into their bed with messy hair and Ethan followed close behind, when Margaret grumbled about coffee being too weak while making pancakes shaped like peace lilies, when the phone started ringing with calls from the foundation and Alexander's business and reporters who still wanted to know the details of their story, Sophia would remember this moment. The quiet before the beautiful chaos of their lives resumed. the peace that came not from having no problems, but from knowing that whatever problems came, they would face them together, because that's what families do. Real families, chosen families, families that are built one decision at a time to love instead of leave, to fight instead of flee, to believe in happy endings even when they seem impossible. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very stubborn, and very willing to fight for what matters, the impossible happens anyway. Their love story hadn't started with a fairy tale meeting or ended with a perfect wedding. It had been messier than that, more painful, more real. But it was theirs, and it was true, and it would last. After all, the best love stories aren't the ones where everything goes according to plan. They're the ones where people choose each other again and again, through the disasters and the triumphs, through the times when love feels easy and the times when it feels like the hardest thing in the world. This was one of those stories. Their love was strong, but their fight for a better world and for justice was just beginning. Years passed, and the Stone Martinez Foundation grew from a small operation in Soho to one of the most respected child advocacy organizations in the country. But success brought new challenges, and with it, new threats from people who didn't want their criminal networks exposed. It was a Tuesday morning in spring when everything changed again. Sophia was in her office reviewing grant applications when Marcus burst through the door without knocking. "We have a problem," he said, his face pale. "Victoria's been released on bail." The words hit Sophia like ice water. "That's impossible. She was sentenced to 25 years. Her lawyers found a technicality. Something about evidence being obtained illegally. She's fighting the conviction and she's out pending appeal." Sophia's hands shook as she reached for her phone to call Alexander. But before she could dial, her assistant knocked on the door. "Mrs. Stone, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's about your children." The woman waiting in the reception area was young, maybe 25, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd seen too much. She clutched a manila envelope like it contained her life savings. "My name is Carmen Rodriguez," she said when Sophia approached. "I used to work for Victoria Harrington. I have information you need to see." Sophia led her to a private conference room, her heart pounding. Carmen's hands shook as she opened the envelope and spread photographs across the table. "These are from Victoria's private files," Carmen said. "She kept records of everything. Every child, every transaction, every family destroyed. Your twins weren't the only ones." The photographs showed dozens of children, all with case numbers and dollar amounts written on the back. Sophia recognized some of the faces from missing person reports she'd seen over the years. Her stomach churned as she realized the scope of what they were looking at. "Why are you showing me this?" Sophia asked. "Because Victoria's planning something. She blames you for destroying her operation, and she wants revenge. She's been making calls, reaching out to her old contacts. There's talk of taking your children." Again, the room seemed to spin. "Taking them where?" "Overseas. Somewhere you'll never find them. She has connections in countries that don't have extradition treaties with the U.S. Mrs. Stone, you need to protect your family. Victoria won't stop until she's hurt you the way you hurt her." Sophia called Alexander immediately. Within an hour, they had private security watching the children's school, their apartment, and the foundation offices. But security could only do so much against someone with Victoria's resources and connections. "We need to go to the FBI," Alexander said as they sat in their kitchen that evening, watching Ethan and Emma do homework at the counter while two bodyguards stood by the windows. With what evidence? Carmen's photos could have been faked, and even if they're real, Victoria's lawyers will say they were stolen. "So what do you suggest?" Sophia looked at her children, now 8 years old, and blissfully unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down again. Emma was working on a math worksheet while humming under her breath, the same way Alexander did when he was concentrating. Ethan was drawing in the margins of his reading log, his artistic talent growing stronger every day. "We run," Sophia said quietly, "just for a while, until we can figure out how to stop her permanently." Run where? Remember that house we looked at in Vermont? The one with the art studio and the big yard? It's still for sale. Alexander nodded slowly. Vermont was 3 hours from the city, far enough to buy them time, but close enough that they could still manage the foundation remotely. And the house came with 10 acres of land, easy to secure and monitor. It feels like we're letting her win, Alexander said. We're protecting our children. That's not losing, that's being smart. They left the city that weekend, telling Ethan and Emma it was a family vacation that might last a little longer than usual. The children were excited about the adventure, about living in a house with horses in the neighboring pasture and a stream running through the backyard. But the vacation feeling didn't last long. On their third day in Vermont, Margaret spotted a black sedan parked on the road that led to their property. It was gone by the time Alexander went to investigate, but they all knew what it meant. "She found us," Sophia said that night as they sat in the kitchen, speaking in low voices while the children slept upstairs. "How?" "We were careful about the purchase, used shell companies, paid in cash. Victoria has resources we don't understand. Money, connections, people who owe her favors." Margaret, who had insisted on coming with them despite her age, looked up from the tea she was brewing. "Maybe it's time to stop running and start fighting back. We've been fighting back for 3 years. Look where it got us. No, I mean really fighting back. Not through lawyers and courts and proper channels. Those things work when you're dealing with normal criminals. But Victoria isn't normal. She's a predator. And predators only understand one language." Alexander frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes good people have to be willing to get their hands dirty to protect what matters most." That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She stood at the bedroom window, looking out at the Vermont countryside and thinking about Margaret's words. How far was she willing to go to protect her family? What lines was she willing to cross? The answer came to her at dawn when Emma crawled into bed between her and Alexander, seeking comfort from a nightmare she couldn't remember. "Mommy," Emma whispered, "are we safe here?" "Yes, baby. Daddy and I will always keep you safe. Promise? Promise." And Sophia meant it. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, she would keep that promise. The plan they developed over the next few days was risky and probably illegal, but it was also their only option for ending Victoria's threat permanently. Using contacts from their foundation work, they reached out to investigative journalists in 3 countries where Victoria had operated. They provided evidence of her crimes, but also something more valuable, financial records showing which officials had been paid to look the other way. "We're not just going after Victoria," Sophia explained to Alexander as they coordinated the releases. "We're going after her entire network. Every corrupt official, every dirty lawyer, every judge who took her money. When we're done, she won't have anywhere left to hide." The story broke on a Tuesday morning, simultaneously in New York, London, and São Paulo. Within hours, warrants were being issued in multiple countries. Bank accounts were frozen. Officials who had thought themselves untouchable were being arrested. Victoria's response was swift and vicious. That afternoon, as Sophia was reviewing news coverage of the arrests, her phone rang. "You think you're so clever?" Victoria's voice was ice-cold fury. "You think you've won, but I still have cards to play." "It's over, Victoria. Your network is finished. Your money is frozen. Your friends are all running for cover." "My friends, yes, but not my family. You remember Isabella, don't you? My daughter? She's been keeping an eye on things in the city while I've been otherwise occupied." Sophia's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "Your precious foundation. All those children you claim to protect. Isabella's been very interested in your security protocols, your staff schedules, your daily routines. Amazing what people will tell you when you volunteer to help." The line went dead. Sophia immediately called the foundation, but the phone just rang and rang. Then she called Marcus. "I can't reach anyone at the office," she said, as soon as he answered. That's because we evacuated an hour ago, Marcus said grimly. Someone called in a bomb threat. The building's been cleared. Bomb squad is on the way. It's a distraction, Sophia realized. Victoria doesn't want to hurt random people. She wants to hurt us. The bomb threat is to get everyone out of the building so Isabella can... Can what? Access our files. Client information, addresses of the families we've helped, financial records. Everything she'd need to target the people we've sworn to protect. Alexander was already grabbing car keys. We have to get back to the city. No, Margaret said firmly. That's exactly what she wants. You go racing back to Manhattan, leave the children with minimal protection, and Victoria gets her second chance at them. So what do you suggest? I go to the city. I'm an old woman, not a threat to anyone. I can get into the building, assess the situation, maybe even stop Isabella if she's still there. Absolutely not, Alexander said. You're not trained for this kind of thing. Margaret smiled grimly. Son, I survived 30 years as a social worker in the Bronx. I think I can handle one spoiled rich girl. In the end, they compromised. Margaret would go to the city, but she'd have backup from a private security team Alexander trusted. Sophia and Alexander would stay in Vermont with the children, but they'd coordinate everything from there. The next few hours were the longest of Sophia's life. She sat in the Vermont kitchen, surrounded by laptops and phones, managing a crisis from 300 miles away while trying to pretend everything was normal for Ethan and Emma. Mom, why do you keep checking your phone? Ethan asked as they ate lunch. Just work stuff, honey. Nothing important. But it was important. Margaret had reached the foundation building and confirmed that Isabella was inside, along with two men who were clearly not building maintenance. They were in Sophia's office, copying files from her computer and photographing documents. Can you stop them? Sophia asked during a whispered phone call. Working on it, Margaret replied. But they're not just copying files. They're planting something. Looks like listening devices, maybe cameras. They want to monitor us, figure out our routines, our security protocols. Smart. Evil, but smart. Through the security feeds Margaret had managed to access, they watched Isabella and her associates finish their work and leave the building. But the damage was already done. Victoria now had enough information to target not just Sophia's family, but dozens of other families the Foundation had helped over the years. We have to warn them, Sophia said as they reviewed the list of compromised files. Every family, every client, everyone whose information was in those files. That's over 200 families, Alexander pointed out. And if we warn them, we tip our hand to Victoria. She'll know we're aware of the breach. If we don't warn them, innocent people could get hurt. If we do warn them, our own children could get hurt. It was an impossible choice, and Sophia felt the weight of it crushing down on her. How do you choose between protecting your own family and protecting strangers? How do you live with either decision? The answer came from an unexpected source. That evening, as they debated their options, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas. Mommy, I had a bad dream, she said, rubbing her eyes. Sophia pulled her daughter into her lap, inhaling the sweet scent of her shampoo. Tell me about it. There were other kids, and they were scared, and the grown-ups who were supposed to protect them weren't there, and I wanted to help them, but I didn't know how. Sophia exchanged a look with Alexander over Emma's head. Even in her dreams, their daughter was thinking about helping others. What do you think we should do in a situation like that? Sophia asked gently. Emma considered this seriously. Help the other kids first, even if it's scary. Because there are more of them than there are of us, so helping them helps more people. Even if helping them might put us in danger? That's what heroes do, right? They help people even when it's scary, out of the mouths of babes. Sophia kissed her daughter's forehead and carried her back to bed, but Emma's words echoed in her mind long after the little girl had fallen asleep. They spent the next day making phone calls, sending encrypted messages, reaching out to every family on Victoria's stolen list. Some were grateful for the warning and immediately took precautions. Others thought Sophia was being paranoid and dismissed the threat, but most understood the gravity of the situation. These were families who had already been victimized once, who had been helped by the foundation to rebuild their lives. They knew how dangerous people like Victoria could be. By evening, they had created an informal network of protection. Families were staying with relatives, changing their routines, watching for suspicious activity. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Now what? Alexander asked as they finished the last of the calls. Now we wait, Sophia said. Victoria knows we're onto her. She'll have to make her move soon before we can organize any more defenses. And when she does? When she does, we'll be ready. The attack came 3 days later, but not in the way any of them expected. Instead of targeting the foundation or trying to kidnap Ethan and Emma, Victoria went after their finances. Overnight, the foundation's bank accounts were emptied, their credit lines canceled, their donations frozen by court orders based on manufactured allegations of fraud. She's trying to destroy us financially, Alexander said as they reviewed the damage. Force us to shut down the foundation, make us choose between protecting our own family and continuing to help others. Can we fight the court orders? Eventually, yes, but it'll take months, maybe years. And in the meantime, all the families we help will be left without support. Sophia stared at the financial reports, feeling the familiar surge of rage that had sustained her through 5 years of investigation. Victoria was willing to hurt hundreds of innocent people just to get revenge on one family. There's another way, she said quietly. What way? We give her what she wants. Or at least, we make her think we're giving her what she wants. Alexander frowned. I don't understand. Victoria wants to hurt us personally. She wants to see us suffer the way she thinks we made her suffer. So we let her think she's winning. Over the next hour, Sophia outlined her plan. It was dangerous and would require perfect timing, but it might be their only chance to end Victoria's threat permanently. You want to use our children as bait, Alexander said when she finished. I want to use the appearance of vulnerability as bait. The children will never actually be in danger. How can you guarantee that? Because we'll control every aspect of the situation. Victoria thinks she's smart, but she's also arrogant. She'll want to gloat, to see our faces when she thinks she's won. That arrogance will be her downfall. The plan required them to return to Manhattan, to make it appear that they were desperate and running out of options. They moved back into their penthouse apartment, but with security measures Victoria couldn't see. Hidden cameras, panic rooms, escape routes that looked like ordinary architecture. They also reached out to the FBI, finally sharing everything they knew about Victoria's operation. Agent Sarah Chen, who had been investigating child trafficking for a decade, was particularly interested in the evidence Carmen had provided. This is enough to put her away forever, Agent Chen said as she reviewed the files. But only if we can prove chain of custody, prove the documents are authentic. We can do better than that, Sophia said. We can get her to confess. How? By making her think she's already won. The trap was set carefully. Sophia and Alexander made it appear that their security had been compromised, that they were desperate and making mistakes. They leaked information about their daily routines, their children's schedules, their financial difficulties, and Victoria took the bait. The kidnapping attempt came on a Thursday afternoon. Ethan and Emma were supposed to be at soccer practice, but instead they were safely hidden in a FBI safe house while body doubles attended practice in their place. Sophia and Alexander were at the foundation office, but surrounded by agents posing as staff members. Victoria herself showed up, along with Isabella and 6 men who looked like they could bench press a small car. They stormed into the foundation office with guns drawn, expecting to find a helpless family. Instead, they found 20 FBI agents. Victoria Harrington, Agent Chen said as the handcuffs clicked into place. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, child trafficking, money laundering, and about 30 other federal charges. Victoria's face was a mask of rage as she realized she'd been outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," she snarled at Sophia. "I have friends, connections. I'll be out in 6 months." "No," Sophia said calmly. "You won't, because we didn't just catch you attempting to kidnap our children. We caught you on camera confessing to trafficking dozens of others. Every conversation you've had for the past month has been recorded. Every phone call, every meeting, every moment of arrogance where you thought you were smarter than everyone else." The truth hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her face went white as she realized the scope of what they'd captured. "You see," Sophia continued, "you were right about one thing. This was personal, but not because you destroyed my family 5 years. Ego. Because you've been destroying families for decades, and I decided it was time someone stopped you." The trial lasted 6 months and made international headlines. Victoria was convicted on 47 separate charges and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Isabella received 25 years for her role in the conspiracy. Dozens of other officials and criminals in Victoria's network were arrested and convicted. But more importantly, the evidence uncovered during the investigation led to the rescue of over 200 children who had been trafficked through Victoria's network. Many were reunited with their biological families. Others, like Ethan and Emma, had found new families who loved them unconditionally. The Stone Martinez Foundation used the publicity from the trial to launch a new initiative, a rapid response team that could investigate suspected trafficking cases and coordinate with law enforcement worldwide. Within 2 years, they had offices in 12 countries and had helped reunite over 500 families. On the 5th anniversary of Victoria's conviction, Sophia stood in the foundation's main conference room, looking at a wall covered with photographs. Each picture showed a family that had been reunited, a child who had been rescued, a case that had been solved. "Impressive," Alexander said, joining her at the wall. "It's not enough," Sophia replied. "There are still thousands of children out there, still families being destroyed. But there are fewer than there were yesterday, and tomorrow there will be fewer still. That's progress." Ethan and Emma, now 13 and taller than Sophia had expected, burst into the conference room with the energy that only teenagers possess. "Mom, Dad, are you ready?" Emma asked. "The car's here." They were going to a graduation ceremony at a local high school. One of the children they'd helped rescue 5 years ago was graduating as valedictorian and had asked them to attend. It was moments like these that reminded Sophia why the work mattered. As they walked toward the elevator, Ethan fell into step beside his mother. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it? All the fighting, all the danger we went through? Sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like if Victoria had never existed." Sophia considered the question seriously. If Victoria had never existed, a lot of other families would have been spared terrible pain. But if she'd never existed, I might never have learned how strong I am. Your father might never have learned what really matters in life. And we might never have found our way to each other. So you don't regret it? I regret that people had to suffer. I regret that children were hurt. But I don't regret the choices we made to stop it. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, but that doesn't make it the wrong choice. Emma, who had been listening, nodded thoughtfully. "Is that why you and Dad do this work? Because it's the right thing even when it's hard?" "That's exactly why we do it." As they rode down in the elevator, Sophia looked at her family and felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life lived with purpose. They had faced the worst humanity had to offer and had chosen to fight back. They had protected their own children while helping to save hundreds of others. It hadn't been easy. There had been sleepless nights and dangerous moments and times when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But they had done it together, as a family. And that had made all the difference. The graduation ceremony was beautiful. The young man who spoke as valedictorian talked about resilience, about finding hope in dark places, about the adults who had refused to give up on him when he couldn't believe in himself. 5 years ago, he said, looking directly at Sophia and Alexander in the audience. I was lost. I had been taken from my family, told lies about who I was and where I belonged. But some people refused to accept that this was just how the world worked. They fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. They brought me home. After the ceremony, as they drove through the city, Sophia reflected on how much had changed since that night 10 years ago when she had first met Alexander. They had both been different people then, younger, more naive, less tested by life's cruelties. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the difficult times weren't obstacles to happiness, but the very forge where real happiness was created. The easy love of fairy tales had nothing on the deep-tested love of people who had chosen each other again and again through every trial. What are you thinking about? Alexander asked as they pulled into their driveway. The future, Sophia said. Our future. The Foundation's future. The future of all those families we haven't helped yet. Always planning the next move. Someone has to. That night, after Ethan and Emma had gone to bed and Margaret had settled in her room with a book and her usual cup of chamomile tea, Sophia and Alexander sat on their balcony overlooking Central Park. The same park where Sophia had once been homeless and desperate. The same city where they had lost each other and found each other again. The same skyline that had witnessed their lowest moments and their greatest triumphs. Do you think we've made a difference? Sophia asked. Look around, Alexander said, gesturing toward the lights of the city. Somewhere out there are families sleeping safely in their beds because of the work we've done. There are children who will grow up knowing they are loved because we refuse to give up. There are criminals behind bars who will never hurt another child because we were willing to fight. Yes, I think we've made a difference. And tomorrow? Tomorrow. We'll make another difference. And the day after that, and the day after that, until we can't anymore. And then Ethan and Emma and all the other young people we've inspired will take over and keep making differences of their own. Sophia leaned back in her chair, feeling the deep contentment that comes from a purpose larger than oneself. Their love story had begun with tragedy and separation, had been tested by loss and betrayal, and had ultimately been forged into something stronger than either of them could have created alone. But more than that, their story had become part of something larger, a movement, a mission, a belief that families should be protected and children should be safe and justice should mean something more than just words on paper. I love you, she said to Alexander. I love you too. Forever and always. Forever and always, she agreed, and in the morning they would wake up and continue the work. There would be new cases to investigate, new families to help, new challenges to face. The work would never be finished, but that didn't make it less important. If anything, it made it more important, because in a world that often seemed determined to break people apart, they had chosen to bring people together. In a system that sometimes failed to protect the innocent, they had created their own system of protection. In a society that too often looked the away from uncomfortable truths, they had forced people to look and see and act. They had taken their own broken places and used them to heal others. They had taken their own love story and turned it into a foundation for building other love stories, other families, other happily ever afters. And that, Sophia thought as she drifted off to sleep, was perhaps the most important thing of all. Not just finding your own happy ending, but using it to help others find theirs too. The city sparkled below them, full of stories yet to be told, families yet to be reunited, justice yet to be served. And at the heart of it all, a family that had proven that love really could conquer all, not through magic or miracles, but through determination and hard work, and the simple, radical choice to never give up on each other. Their story was ending, but it was also just beginning. Because the best love stories aren't the ones that end with, "and they lived happily ever after." They're the ones that end with, "and then they went out and helped other people live happily ever after too." And that's exactly what they did.